Tonight I have 3 true scary stories for you. These are the kinds of stories that do not begin with anything dramatic. No music, no storm, no obvious warning. Just regular people, regular places, and one small moment where something starts to feel wrong. The first story happened in a laundromat. The second happened in a house that should have felt safe. And the third happened on a drive that should have been completely forgettable. So let's get into it. The first story took place in February of last year when I was working nights at a warehouse outside of Columbus. My shift ended at 11:30, and because my apartment building's laundry room had been out of order for almost 2 weeks, I had started going to this 24-hour laundromat a few miles away after work. I hated doing laundry that late, but it was the only time I had. The place was in a small strip plaza between a vape shop and a tax office. During the day, it probably felt normal enough, but after midnight, it had this weird, dead feeling to it. Half the lights in the parking lot never worked, and the windows had those old faded posters taped to them from years ago, so from outside you could barely tell if anyone was in there. The inside was always too bright though, just rows of washers, old tile floor, humming fluorescent lights, and that detergent smell mixed with something older underneath it. There was usually one employee, a woman maybe in her 40s, who sat behind a little counter near the back and watched videos on her phone. The first few times I went, there were always at least 2 or 3 other people there, nothing unusual. Then one Tuesday night, I got there around 12:10 and the lot was almost empty. Just my car and one dark SUV parked near the side of the building. I remember noticing that because the SUV was backed into the spot, which isn't that weird by itself, but the windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see if anyone was inside. I grabbed my laundry basket and went in. The woman at the counter was there, but nobody else. I loaded 2 washers and sat in one of the plastic chairs by the front windows. I had headphones in, not playing anything, just because I didn't want anyone talking to me. Maybe 10 minutes after I sat down, a man came in. He looked to be in his 50s maybe, wearing a tan work jacket and a baseball cap. He didn't have any laundry with him, which stood out immediately. He just walked in empty-handed, looked around slowly, and then went over to the vending machines near the bathrooms. I assumed maybe he was using the bathroom or buying a drink, but he didn't do either. He just stood there looking at the machines without touching anything. After maybe 30 seconds, he turned and looked right at me, not in a casual way either. It was the kind of look where you instantly know somebody is not just letting their eyes drift around the room. He was looking at me specifically, like he had come in already knowing I was there. I looked away and took out my phone, figuring if I ignored him, he'd either leave or go do whatever he actually came in for. A minute later, I heard the chair scrape across the floor. He had sat down 2 seats away from me. Again, no laundry, no drink, nothing. Just sitting there. I got up and moved to the other side of the laundromat near my washers. I pretended I was checking the cycle time, but really I just didn't want him sitting near me. I could feel him watching me, even without looking over. After a few seconds, I glanced toward the counter to see if the employee had noticed any of this. She had. She was looking at him too, not in a panicked way, but definitely watching him. That made me feel a little better for maybe 5 seconds until she stood up, went into the back room behind the counter, and let the door swing shut behind her. And suddenly, it was just me and him out there. I started counting down the time left on the washer. 15 minutes. I told myself I could wait 15 minutes, switch the clothes, and leave if he was still being weird. But then he stood up and started walking, not toward the door, toward the row I was standing by. I moved down the aisle like I was looking for another machine, and he stopped. Then he turned and slowly walked the other direction. I remember thinking maybe he was trying to make it seem like he wasn't following me, but it had the opposite effect. It made it worse. It made it feel intentional. He ended up standing by the dryers at the far wall. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It said, "You here alone?" I actually froze when I read it. My first thought was that maybe it was some random spam thing, just unlucky timing. Then another text came in. "Blue scrubs, right?" I was wearing blue work scrubs under my jacket. I looked up immediately, and the man by the dryers was staring at his phone. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I'd missed a step going downstairs. I turned and went straight to the counter, pushed open the back room door, and found the employee in there smoking out an open side window. I told her a man out front was texting me somehow and staring at me. She put the cigarette out right away and came back into the main room with me. The man was still there, but now he had moved closer to the front. She asked him if he needed something washed. He smiled and said he was waiting for somebody. Then she said, "Then you can wait outside." The second she said that, his whole face changed, not angry exactly, just flat, like the smile had never meant anything in the first place. He took a step towards a door, then stopped and looked at me. He said, "You left your car unlocked." I had not. I knew I had not. The employee repeated herself louder and pointed outside, so finally he went out. But instead of leaving, he just stood on the sidewalk in front of the windows, looking in. The woman locked the front door and told me to call someone. I told her I didn't really have anyone nearby at that hour, so she said she'd stay until I finished and she'd call her brother who owned the place. I checked my phone again. There was a third message now. "Hurry up then." I blocked the number, but I was shaking at that point. We pulled my wet clothes from the washers and stuffed them into trash bags instead of drying them. Her brother showed up maybe 10 minutes later in a pickup truck, and the dark SUV that had been parked outside was gone by then. So was the man. Her brother walked me to my car anyway. When I got there, the driver's side door wasn't open, but the handle was sitting at a slight angle, like someone had pulled on it hard. And tucked under my windshield wiper was a dryer sheet folded into a square. I know that sounds small, but it scared me more than the messages, because it meant he had either been at my car before I came in or while I was inside with my back turned. I never went back there again. I started driving 20 extra minutes to another laundromat in a completely different town, and every now and then I still think about how normal that night would have sounded if I only described the setting. A laundromat after work, nothing more than that. Until it was. The second story happened to my older sister, and for a while she didn't tell anybody because she thought it sounded too strange to be believed. At the time, she was renting the upstairs of a split-level house in Virginia. It wasn't a duplex exactly, more like an older house that had been awkwardly divided into 2 units. Her landlord lived downstairs, and she had a separate entrance through a side stairwell that led up to her kitchen. She'd been there maybe 6 months when this happened. She liked the place because it was cheap and quiet and close to the elementary school where she worked. The only thing she ever complained about was that the house made a lot of noise. Pipes knocking, floors creaking, vents ticking after the heat shut off. Old house sounds. So when she first started hearing footsteps at night, she assumed it was the landlord downstairs. Then she started paying closer attention. The footsteps were above her. That was impossible because she lived on the top floor. There was only a small attic space above her unit, and there wasn't even proper flooring up there, just beams and insulation. The first time she really noticed, it was around the 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. She woke up because it sounded like somebody had taken 3 slow steps directly over her bedroom ceiling. Step, pause, steps, pause, steps. She sat up in bed listening, expecting maybe a squirrel or raccoon, but it didn't sound like an animal moving randomly. It sounded deliberate, heavy in a careful way. Then it stopped. The next morning, she mentioned it to her landlord, a guy in his 70s named Walter. He laughed and said old houses settle in weird ways, and she was probably just hearing the ductwork. She accepted that at first, but over the next week, it kept happening. Not every night, just often enough to make her dread going to bed, always after midnight, always 3 to 6 steps, always directly above one of 3 places: her bedroom, the hallway, or the little room she used as an office. Then one Friday evening, she came home from work and found a fine layer of insulation dust on her office desk. Not much, just enough to notice because the desk was black. She looked up and saw a tiny line along the ceiling near the attic hatch in the hallway. The hatch was one of those square panels you push up from below with a pole, but this one was slightly off-center now, like it hadn't settled back correctly. She called Walter and asked if anyone had been up there doing work. He said no. She asked if he had a ladder she could borrow so she could at least look. He said he did and brought it up a few minutes later. He seemed annoyed more than concerned, which she told me later was actually what made her more nervous. Because if he really thought it was nothing, why did he suddenly seem so eager to keep the whole thing casual? He stayed downstairs while she set the ladder up. When she pushed the hatch open, a little more insulation came down onto the floor. She shined her phone flashlight up, and at first all she saw was pink insulation and wooden beams. Then she saw a flattened area. It looked like somebody had been lying up there. There was a clear space between the insulation, like a body-shaped patch where it had been compressed. And next to that was an empty plastic water bottle. She climbed down immediately and called Walter back upstairs. He came up, looked for maybe 3 seconds, and then said it was probably left behind by whoever had worked on the wiring before she moved in. That would have been almost believable if not for the fact that the bottle looked clean, not dusty, and the insulation around it had a fresh, disturbed look to it. My sister asked him if anyone else had a key to her place. He said no. She asked if there was any way into the attic from downstairs. He said no again, but too quickly. That night, she didn't stay there. She came to my apartment and slept on my couch. The next day, she went back in the afternoon to get more clothes. The first thing she noticed was that the ladder Walter had left in the hallway was gone. The second thing she noticed was that the attic hatch was perfectly aligned again. Too perfectly, like someone had deliberately fixed it. She got the creepiest feeling then and started checking the rooms before packing anything else. Her bedroom looked normal, so did the bathroom. But in the kitchen, one of the cabinet doors over the fridge was slightly open. She never used that cabinet because it was too high to reach comfortably. Inside was a paper plate with 2 slices of bread on it, both stale and partly flattened like they'd been sitting there more than a day. That by itself would have been weird enough, but behind the plate was something even worse. A small flashlight, and beside it, folded carefully, was one of her t-shirts, not stolen, not hidden in a drawer, folded and placed there. She left the apartment right then and called the police from her car. 2 officers came out and checked the place along with Walter. They went into the attic and found more than just the bottle. There was a blanket, snack wrappers, a portable phone charger, and according to one of the officers, signs that somebody had been moving carefully between the beams for at least a little while. They never found the person. What they did find, though, was an access panel in the downstairs laundry room that led into the same attic space, mostly hidden behind shelves and paint cans. Walter claimed he had forgotten about it because he never used it. The police apparently did not find that answer very convincing. My sister moved out that weekend. For months afterward, she couldn't sleep properly if she heard creaking overhead. Even now, if she's in an old house and it settles at night, you can see it on her face immediately. She goes still and listens. And honestly, I don't blame her, because there is something especially awful about the idea that the place you use to shut out the world can be occupied from above without you knowing it. That your ceiling is not really your ceiling, just a thin barrier between you and somebody patient enough to wait in the dark. The third story happened to me, and it is probably the one I think about the most, because if one small thing had gone differently, I honestly don't know how it would have ended. This was in August, and I was driving back from seeing a friend in Kentucky. He had moved down there for work, and I stayed later than I meant to because we hadn't seen each other in a while. By the time I left, it was already after 10:30 at night. The drive home should have taken around 2.5 hours. Most of it was highway, then a stretch of narrower state roads for the last 40 minutes. I was tired, but not dangerously tired, just ready to get home. About an hour into the drive, I stopped at a gas station right off the highway. It was one of those places that feels half closed even when it's open. Bright lights inside, dark lot outside, one cashier, almost nobody there. I filled up, went in, grabbed an energy drink I probably didn't need, and used the bathroom. When I came back out, a white sedan had pulled up to the pump behind mine. There was a guy sitting in the driver's seat, maybe mid-30s, shaved head, one arm hanging out the open window. He looked at me as I walked past, and I did that automatic polite nod people do at gas stations. He didn't nod back. He just watched me. I got in my car and left. 10 minutes later, I noticed headlights behind me on the highway that stayed behind me longer than most would have. Not right on my bumper, just there. At first, I didn't think much of it because highway traffic at night tends to spread out that way. But when I got off at my exit, those headlights got off too, still not enough by itself. Then I turned onto a smaller road. The headlights turned too. I told myself there were only so many routes in that area, so it could still be nothing. But I started paying more attention. I took 2 turns I normally wouldn't have taken just to test it. The car stayed with me. At that point, my hands started sweating on the wheel. I sped up a little. So did the car behind me. I slowed down. It slowed down too. I still hadn't gotten a good look at it because the roads were dark and curving, but something about the height and shape made me think it might be that same white sedan from the gas station. I knew enough not to drive home. That was the one good decision I made immediately. Instead, I pulled up my maps and searched for the nearest police station. The problem was, the nearest one was 21 minutes away, and the roads between me and it were almost empty. I kept driving and tried not to make it obvious I knew I was being followed. The car stayed back just far enough to feel controlled, like the driver wasn't nervous or impulsive, like he was comfortable. After maybe 5 minutes, I got to a red light at a crossroads with nothing open except a closed farm supply place and a dark church. I was the only car at the intersection. The sedan pulled up behind me close enough that I couldn't see its headlights anymore, just the glow. Then my driver's side mirror shifted. Not by itself. It had been bumped. I looked over instinctively, and there was a person standing outside my window. I still don't understand how he moved that fast without me seeing him get out. It was the same guy from the gas station. He bent down a little and made a rolling motion with his hand, like he wanted me to lower the window. I shook my head no. He smiled. Then he pointed toward the rear of my car and mouthed, "Your tire." The light was still red. I didn't move. He tapped once on the glass with one fingernail and then stood up straight, still smiling, before walking slowly back to the sedan. The second the light turned green, I went through it. And that's when he stopped hanging back. The sedan accelerated hard and stayed right on me. Every turn I took, he took. I ran one yellow light that turned red as I went under it. He ran it too. I called 911 at that point and put the phone on speaker. I told the dispatcher everything as fast as I could while trying to read road signs. She told me not to stop anywhere and to keep heading toward the station. Then the sedan's headlights went off, completely off. That was one of the worst parts, because now I could barely see it, except when we passed through small patches of light. But I knew it was still there. I could feel it. A few minutes later, I saw flashing lights ahead and almost felt my whole body collapse with relief. A sheriff's SUV was waiting in a little gravel pull-off just before the turn for the station. As soon as my headlights hit the deputy, the sedan's lights came back on and it swerved into the opposite lane, made a hard turn into what looked like a private driveway, and disappeared behind a row of trees. The deputy pulled out after it, and another unit that I hadn't even seen came from farther up the road and followed too. I drove straight to the station, shaking so badly I could barely park. They took my statement inside, and after maybe half an hour, one of the deputies came back and asked me if I'd left the gas station trash can area with the flat tire. I said no. He nodded once and said, "Didn't think so." Apparently, when they checked the roadway at that red light intersection, they found a strip of nails scattered near where the shoulder widened out, just beyond the corner. Not enough to hit every car, just enough that if someone pulled over there in the dark, they would probably stay there. They never caught the driver that night. They found the sedan abandoned behind a vacant farmhouse about 6 miles away. It had stolen plates on it. I asked the deputy what he thought the guy wanted, and he said he couldn't say for sure. Then after a second he added, "But people don't kill their headlights and follow someone for 20 miles to help with a tire." I still think about that line sometimes, because he's right. Nothing about it was random. The waiting behind me at the gas station, the same route, the quiet distance, the fake concern at the red light, the nails. It all felt prepared, like he had done some version of it before. And that's what makes that one stick with me more than anything else. Not that it was dramatic, it actually wasn't, at least not on the surface. For most of it, it was just a car behind me on a road at night. But sometimes that's all it is at first, just a car behind you, just footsteps over your ceiling, just a man in a laundromat with no laundry. And then, little by little, the ordinary shape of the night changes. And by the time you understand what kind of story you're in, you're already in it. Anyway, those were the 3 stories for tonight. I hope you enjoyed them, and as always, if you're listening in the dark, maybe keep the door locked.